We're live, man. I have the fucking down. I actually did reach out to Cookies, who has done some work with Paydirt before to get an intro, but nobody gives a shit about that. My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com, and today we're gonna do an impromptu NHL Slate talk. The community wanted it. We ain't got shit to do. I needed to get away from the 4 children that are downstairs taking up my living room, and so we are here. We're going to talk about a 5-game NHL slate tonight. Like I said, there's nothing else going on, so figured it would be good to do this and kind of take a look at how each one of us go over the slate. I am joined today by Mr. Pablo. Y'all know him. He does the slate talks with me for NFL, and I am joined by Mike Cat as well, who's a valued community member over at Paydirt. OG, Dirt Dog, as we like to call them. I think that him and I are the only ones that call anybody Paydirt Dirt Dog.
I'm trying to make that a thing. Let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, we've been trying to make it a thing for like fucking year and a half or something. So, but I'm joined by him. So we're going to go down the NHL slate today. Mike and I both may have to jump off at some point. I don't think that either one of us will, but if we do, then Pablo will be here and you guys can listen to him ramble for a while. But without, all of that said, Mike, how are you today?
I'm doing well. It's exciting slate. 5-gamer gives you some options, and I'm excited to jump in. So.
Yeah. Pablo, how you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm coming into this slate virgin eyes. I have not looked at it aside from seeing it was a 5-gamer and regging this morning. But it looks like a good one. I think we're going to have a lot of action in terms of I think there's a lot of casuals playing tonight from like NBA or whatever else. I don't know. I don't play NBA, but it seems based off of like X and Discord that a lot of people are interested because there's good contests. So those are always good nights because some of the people who don't regularly play, you can kind of tell because of the roster construction. So I think nights like these usually have a little bit more edge than nights that are less popular.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And whenever we do the All-Star break, I always make the joke like what of the players who are actually good at DFS are going to take down an NHL slate tonight, because all the good players, like myself included, there's always a 444 that's opened. I always play it. All the best players always jump in, and it's kind of like a trophy system for all like the entirety of the DFS community to like jump in and play hockey and see who's the best at this niche sport. So I'm kind of excited. I have not really looked at it much. I'm kind of like Pablo here. I have done work on the contest sims though. And actually I'm going to steal the screen really quick here, Pablo, because I want to talk a little bit about the changes that I made, because you being an asshole for some reason said that you don't understand how these things work.
Said the truth. I said, nobody knows what this means. And I'm the only one speaking up.
I'm the only one brave enough to ask these questions. Shut the fuck up. I did a full hour live stream. It's on you guys if you didn't watch it. That is not my problem. But I will talk about something here really quick. So I did 2 different contest sims here. And I want to, like, if you guys want to know all about the contest sims, there's a video. I will link it in the comments below. Actually, I guess I can probably go grab it right now. I did a full video going over the NHL models and talking through how to utilize them. I'm going to post it in the comments right now. So you can go there if you want full info on how the contest sims works. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the stack type statistics because it's a new thing that was added in today. So what this tells you is position. I'm going to rename this to stack size as soon as I'm off of this fucking live stream. But this is the stack sizes that were used in winning lineups in the contest sims, okay, for this set of simulations. So this set of simulations was 1,000 sims. And for this one, for a very sharp field, 4-man stacks were used 39% of the time. 3-man stacks were used 38.5% of the time. 2-man stacks were used 22.5% of the time. That is the distribution of stack sizes in a very sharp field that I just ran, okay? So that means no 5-man stacks won the contest. No 1-man stacks won the contest for this specific field, okay? That's the way to read this. The other information here, average projection, is the average projection of each one of the different types of stacks. So 4-man stacks had an average projection based on Paydirt projections of 92.5. 3-man, 89.8. 2-man, 87.81. So that makes sense, right? Like the average projection of a 4-man stack is higher. The average ownership was the lowest of the 3, 68% versus 72% for 2-man stacks. That makes sense too. It's easier to stack up a whole bunch of ownership when you're using one-offs. Average fantasy is the score that won the GPP, is even across the board, 135. This is an interesting quirk that ends up happening in the contest sims. I'm not actually sure why, but if you check every single contest sim, this is a relatively regular thing. And then the GPP projection is a mix of the score that won and the projection of the lineup that won. So again, that is higher for 4-man stacks. Now, this was for a very sharp field. I also ran a different field at above average so that I could show that when you change the strength of the field, the lineups that win the contest end up being different. In this one, because there are more two-man stacks in an average field, because there's less correlation in an average field, more two-man stacks end up winning it. And we even have some one-man, some full lottery lineups that win. Only eight of them. But still, we see that 4-man stacks have the highest projection, have the highest GPP projection, and have the lowest ownership. So I wanted to point that out really quick. If you were to run this on average, we would see 2- and 3-man stacks be like by far the highest, and 4-man drop even farther, because the concept there is that the strength of the field is highly tied to the correlation of the lineups that you are entering. That also matters for the size of the field, right? Like I'm doing it on a medium setting, but if you do it on a large setting, you're going to get more lineups, and therefore more lineups will mean less correlation across those lineups, blah, blah, blah. So I want to talk about that really quick because there were questions, and I think that it's important to note. But if you see this, basically what this means is if you are playing, you should probably be looking at 4-man stacks. They win quite a bit of the time. They have the highest average projection. They have the highest GPP projection, the lowest ownership. They make for good stacks today. I wanted to talk that through before I gave it back to Pablo. So if you guys have questions about the contestants or anything like that, you can ask in the chat here. You can ask in the Discord. You can reach out to me on Twitter or X or whatever the fuck you want to call it. I'm on Blue Sky. If you want to go find me on Blue Sky, I haven't posted that on Twitter because I'm not an asshole, but like I'm over there. Like you can find me and ask questions. Happy to answer them. Anyway, there's my thing. You go ahead and do your thing, Mr. Pablo.
Great. All right. So the way I think for those of you who have watched me do baseball, I do hockey very similarly, which is I like to go down team totals just as a way of just methodically going through all the teams. Luckily on this slate, we only have 5 games, so we can do that pretty rapidly. Mm-hmm. And then I do that in conjunction with what the range of outcomes show. And increasingly, I've been using the research sheets, which I'll show as well. I also have Daily Faceoff open because it's free. And I think Daily Faceoff is a good resource. And I often like to sort of compare and contrast what our range of outcomes show in relation to Daily Faceoff, because I think it's kind of nice to have 2 projection sets as you're thinking through things. And then the last thing I'll say is I don't use any of this data. So please ignore the data, but you can do the same thing on Solver. James knows I'm like a user interface. I'm just very hard to sway off what I'm used to. So I'm a dinosaur who still looks at Fantasy Labs. I really purely use it as a hand builder because I like the way you can look at the way you can see first power play, second power play, what lines people are on. Disclaimer, sometimes this isn't correct, although I think they use the Daily Faceoff feed basically as their feeder. So, but I typically cross-check it with our sheets as I'm going through it to make sure there's no fuck up on the Fantasy Lab side. So with that said, let's dive in and look at the totals. We'll start with Winnipeg. I have the research sheets open here. I'm gonna go efficiently because lock is in an hour and I'm sure people want to build and I want to build. So I'm going to try to kind of go through things in the next 20 to 30 minutes. Mike will give some color. And then we'll have time for some questions and to build. So Winnipeg's team total is obviously the highest. James wonderfully added this HDSF plus tab for me, which is very nice because it combines high danger chances with shots for matchup. And you can see here highest total and very strong HDSF. So it's obviously a very good matchup for Winnipeg. The other thing I like to do is I like to look at the market shares. So team total here, and you can look at, there's a variety of things you can look at. I like to look at, first of all, just color coded. Do any of these stick out as compared to the other ones? And then projected goals, high danger chances, which are correlated with projected goals, and last 14 stats as well. You can see here that for Winnipeg, sometimes you'll get a team like Carolina where the production's a little more spread out. This second line with Nemestikov and Chibrikov have actually been somewhat productive the last week or two. Chibrikov specifically is a guy who I've played a couple times who's really cheap, and you can see their cost is $9,700. But honestly, if you're playing Winnipeg, you're probably playing the first line. You can see here in terms of their how their market share is, they're pretty dominant for that team. That's like if you scroll down here, like very few, if any, other lines kind of dominate production for any given team the way Winnipeg 1 does. Usually that correlates with the range of outcomes. But if we go to lines here and we organize lines by median, Winnipeg 1 has a very strong 52% 2x. And for the pay ups, which you can see is like them, Minnesota 1, Florida 1, Toronto 1, from a point per dollar standpoint, their 2x and 3x is really strong. So what this tells you is, I'm assuming they're heavy chalk. They are, yeah, they look fairly heavy chalk. But I would classify Winnipeg 1 as pretty good chalk. The other context here is they're on a back-to-back. I don't know that matters. They are playing Anaheim. Anaheim is a pretty bad defensive team. And then the last point I'll make about Winnipeg is that if you visualize their first line, and James just talked about stack sizes, you can four-man them, I think, without too much difficulty because Velarde is so cheap. You can do a four-man with Morrissey, Scheifele, Connor, Velarde, and get their 4 of the 5 power play 1 guys. I know the Sims didn't love 5-man stacks, but if you want to try an onslaught, you can play a power play 1 onslaught and include Ehlers. You're obviously going to have to find a value line to pair with that. But I think Winnipeg 1 is good chalk, and I think the first line or making it a power play line and combining with Morrissey and or Ehlers is in play. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the field is going to make a mistake tonight, and Connor won off because he got 9 shots on goal last night and scored 2 goals. I think if you play Winnipeg, you've got to line stack it. Don't get cute and try to grab a piece. I think you play the whole line with Morrissey. I believe Ehlers is still he's out. So I think Perfetti's on that power play 1. So that even gives more of the scoring to that line 1. And they're in a great spot. Back-to-back sometimes scares people away because of the pace and everything. But last night they didn't play all that much. I think Velarde had 17 minutes and Connor had 18. Usually they play over 20, so they're kind of resting them because of that. So they're going to be full go. I really like Winnipeg 1, and I think you full line it with Morrissey or Perfetti and make it a 4. After what James was saying earlier, I think that's my favorite spot of the slate is that spot.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll point out here, I just kind of hand built this just to show. Bob is a pretty strong favorite with Florida. He's only 7,500. Checks a lot of boxes. It's a cheap goalie. You put that 4-man with Bob and you've got 4K left per position. That's very doable. You can usually find like a cheap 2-man or 3-man with a punt D-man. And so 4K for your other 4 spots is very doable. So that's not a difficult 4-man. I hope people just went off Connor. I think it's a pretty good chalk spot for them, and I wouldn't overthink it. Let's move on to the next team. James's sheets are a little more, I think, in real time in terms of team totals. So the next highest team total is Dallas. Dallas is going up against Toronto tonight at home. Let's take a look at the matchup. Very strong HDSF plus. It looks like Dallas is taking a bunch of shots. Toronto's giving up some shots, and then similarly high danger chances. A lot of high danger chances. Looks like second highest on the slate behind Winnipeg, and Toronto's been decent but not great on defense. The other thing to look at, which I don't want to double count, but I do like to look at game pace also. Typically a game pace like over 55, 56 is decent. But obviously the higher the better, because it means there's more events. So it's an okay game pace. It doesn't stand out, but not terrible. So if we look at Dallas's breakdown in terms of market share, they're a little more spread out. Their first and second line all year. We've played a lot of Dallas too. They used to be a lot cheaper. But Dallas 2 has these three guys. Dallas 1 with Paydirt, Hintz, Robertson, Wyatt Johnson. But you can see they have similar high danger chances. They have similar projected goals. So you kind of have to make a choice there. They're similarly priced, only $700 apart. So it is a little bit more of a choice than it is with Winnipeg 1, that you can probably play Dallas 1 or Dallas 2. In terms of correlation, which again is how I like to use kind of something like this, Solver also has it. I'm just used to this. Interface. You can see that Dallas 2 is fully correlated. We have Stank, Marchment, Duchesne, all sort of mid-priced, and then you've got Rupe Hintz, Robertson, Wyatt Johnson, who are also correlated. The benefit there is you can also pair them with Miro Heiskanen, similar to a four-man Winnipeg. I can confidently say that Winnipeg 1, I think, will be substantially more owned than Dallas 1. But Dallas 1 is substantially cheaper. So if we go to range of outcomes, Dallas 1, unfortunately, doesn't look quite as good. Now they're cheaper, right? They're 16.5, and Winnipeg 1 is 20.2. So that's $3,700 of savings, which allows you to get up to a more of a balanced build, as opposed to having to play Winnipeg 1 and then having to play a value line. But I think Dallas 1, Dallas 2, it does not look like they're projecting all that well. If we look at it here this way, Dallas 2 is not super strong. So sheets prefer Dallas 1, and sometimes I kind of like, this is kind of where I like to look at daily faceoff. Again, this is free, so I wouldn't show anything behind a paywall. Dallas 1 looks like a strong projection with a good value. Dallas 2, okay projection, less value. So it looks like both sheets and daily faceoff like Dallas 1. I think they're fine. I think they're a bit sneaky because I don't know that I would pick on Toronto. But it is a cheaper line. If you want to play Winnipeg 1, you can play a Dallas 1 line for 16.5 instead of a Winnipeg 1 for 20.2. Mike, what are your thoughts on Dallas 1, Dallas 2, and the spot they're in?
Yeah, Dallas, be careful. The flu's going through their locker room, so there are a bunch of game time decisions. We're not actually sure who those are yet.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that, at 6:30 or whenever their game is, I don't know if it's 8 or 7, but we might get a pregame skate and get new lines, and somebody might not be out there. So we need to be careful with that. Dallas is interesting. Line 1's finally doing what we wanted them to do all year with Hintz, Robertson, and now Wyatt Johnson. They're finally clicking together. But, I mean, for the first 10, 15 games of the year, like Robertson and Hintz were not anything like last year. It was like, the opposite, where line 2 was doing all the scoring with Duchesne, Sagan, and Marchment. Sagan's injured. He's out for months. So now Stankoven's up on line 2. And it's just not the same chemistry there. But that doesn't mean, Stankoven is, priced less than Sagan was when he left. So either line is doable if they're all playing. I think, Heiskanen with line 1, like you said, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, the other thing I'll point out, Mike, and I don't know your thoughts on this, but if we look at the range of outcomes for individual players, which I like to do, I always start with lines similar to baseball. I start with stacks, and then I go to players. But sometimes I like to look, especially when two lines kind of project similarly. Yeah, the other thing you can do is you can play Jamie Benn. You can look at the 2x, 3x, 4x. None of the 2x, 3x, 4x stand out for Dallas. That's why they don't project that well. Jamie Benn is a little bit better. He's got a 41% 2x and a 4% 3x. And he's typically on the first power play. So you can, if you need a two-man, he's only 4K, team captain Jamie Benn. Do you have any thoughts on playing him as just like a one-off 4K guy, or a two-man with him and like Miro?
Yeah, I like that a lot, actually. What's his price tonight? Is it
4K? He's only 4,000.
Yeah, 4K. I mean, he's one of those guys that you can kind of two-man with another four-man stack and get your exposure that way. I think he's, narrative street. I think he's surpassing Mike Modano tonight as the most games played in the franchise history. So there you go. If you want a little narrative add to sprinkle in, but yeah, I like Jamie Benn. You could even you could put him with maybe Dodonov as a winger, 2,800 to do like a cheap mini there. If you don't want to spend up at a defenseman spot, but there aren't a lot of spend up D options tonight. So yeah, I don't mind Ben with either Dodonov as a cheap mini or with Heiskanen.
The other thing I do on Daily Faceoff, and James, this might be something cool to add to the sheets at some point, is I've got great ideas. Of course, I'm not a programmer, so it's easy for me to say them. But just for like context, sometimes I like doing this on Daily Faceoff, where you can see the lines. It's kind of just nice to visualize it for me. And then I like to click on like last 10 games to sort of see how many minutes are they getting in the last 10 games, how many shots are they taking. I know this is all baked in, but it gives some context. You can also do it for the season. Anyway, but you can see Ben he's playing decent minutes. He's getting a lot of shots off. So I think you could do worse than that. I think it's an idea if you want to get some Dallas exposure without like committing to Dallas 1 or Dallas 2. Larger field, I like. Yeah,
really quick. You can do that on the
site. That's usually the answer.
I have game logs and season logs on the site. So
okay, there you go. All right, we'll move now next to the next team total is Detroit. Detroit's have sort of been sheet darlings. They're kind of like dollar store Nashville. They're playing Philadelphia. Their HDSF does not look great, even though they've got a good team total. The shots for matchup is not great. Torts teams, often play kind of like grind them out defense. Mike can give more context on that than I can. But so not a great sort of like pace. Pace is like really bad. It's not terrible, but it's not strong. And then the HDSF is not great. In terms of matchups for market share, they're a bit more spread up. You can see, line 1 and line 2 look, it's similar to Dallas, where, they're almost the same projected goals, similar metrics in terms of high danger chances and shots. So
I do think that it's worth saying that their last 14 games, Detroit 2 is looking really good. 35% of the shots, 29% of the high danger shots, and 30% of the goals. The goals aren't quite as concentrated, but the shots certainly are.
And that's usually a leading indicator, right?
So I think that if you're looking for a way to delineate between line 1 and line 2, I think that's probably what you do. And that's why we have the last 14 stats in there. It's because it can help you kind of say, if I'm going to coin flip on this, then where am I going to go? And I think that's the way that I would do it. But to your point, also from the research sheets, like they don't take very many shots, period. That's why their projected goals are relatively low. So I understand why they're a value play. I understand wanting to play Detroit too, if you want to play either one of the sides. But from a numbers perspective, you have to understand that like they're cheap for a reason.
Yeah. Now I will say that they're 13-3, and to your point, James, like you might look at this and sort by median and say, oh, like I'm going to play Detroit 1, 31.64 median, 43% 2x, decent 5x, decent 3x rather, and chalky. So, Field thinks it's a good idea, right? But to your point, if you go down to Detroit 2 for 13-3, their 2x is 54%, which is better than 43, 9% 3x, which is better than 5. So Detroit 2 looks like decent value. If we go to see correlation here, and we look at this, I mean, Cop is fucking free at 2,700. Cat is still 62, so he's not too cheap. And then Patrick Kane is all the way down to 4,400. They're pretty darn cheap. So to your point, they're cheap because they don't take a ton of shots, but pretty darn cheap. Again, not a great HDSF matchup, but something worth considering if you need value, I think, is Detroit 2. I don't know that I necessarily would prioritize Detroit 1. I understand they've got an okay total against a Philadelphia team and they're at home, but I don't know. I think I'd probably lean towards Detroit 2 as value and be more interested in paying up for either Dallas 1 or Dallas 2 or more likely Winnipeg 1. Mike, what are your thoughts on Detroit?
Yeah, Detroit offers some more stability, I think, than on the other side with Philly. Philly, you're going to probably get more one-offs with Konechny or Michkov. But, there's a cheap guy on line 1, which is Tarasenko, and a cheap guy on line 2, which is Kopp. And it's like I like playing DeBrincat and Larkin when they're together, like they were at the beginning of the season. I don't know. It's just I like when their best players play together. But I mean, you'll get them on the power play, and DeBrincat is the shooter more than Larkin. So yeah, I would lean towards line 2 with Kane, DeBrincat, and Kopp is. I mean, he could get. Yeah, I mean, for his price, I guess you just put him in unless you're going a 4-man elsewhere or something, and you can mini those two, but. Detroit.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that sticks out here is really Kane, right? If you look at Kane's 2x, 3x, 63%, and DeBrincat's a little pricey. That's why his 3x sucks, 4x sucks. The other one that sticks out is Terchenko, and then you could go super cheap and just punt all the way to Casper, who she's love, and he's actually been a fairly productive. I've actually used him a couple times. He's been like an interesting rookie to play. But James, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I didn't say anything. I'm just hanging out.
Oh, okay. And in terms of daily face-off is just like a kind of another projection set. They think Detroit 1's okay, and they don't love Detroit 2 as much as we do. So that's actually kind of a nice thing, because I think that it probably means that the field won't really play Detroit 2 either, because this is usually like a decent indicator of what the field will be doing. All right, let's keep moving. So next team total we have is Philadelphia, or rather Florida. Florida, again, is one of the pay-up stacks alongside Winnipeg and Toronto. They've got a very strong HGSF matchup. The game pace, it looks really, really good. It looks like it's going to be a fast-paced game. And they just take a lot of shots, and that sticks out, right? Florida takes a lot of shots.
They take a lot of shots, but they're shitty
for what it's
shots.
worth, we also saw Bob is pretty darn cheap, and I often like pairing my goalie with one of my lines if I can for win equity correlation. So that's kind of in the back of my brain. I kind of like that as well. Let's look at Florida's distribution in terms of their market share. You've got Florida 1 in terms of goals. You've got Florida 1 and Florida 2. Last 14. Florida 1 has been really strong and has been sort of more dominant. They've been getting 41% of the high danger chances and 43% of the goals. And so, Florida 1 sort of sticks out a bit. Now, they are very pricey. So, like, there's no way you're playing Florida 1 and Winnipeg 1, unless maybe you're like one-offing Connor. So you're going to have to make a choice there if you're playing Florida 1 to play them instead of Winnipeg 1 in terms of your pay-up lines. If we go to range of outcomes and sort by median here, Florida 1 actually looks very strong. Now, again, they're 21.8, whereas Winnipeg is 20.2, which is why on a point per dollar basis, they're not quite as good. They're 34% 2x and a 2% 3x, whereas Winnipeg 1 is 52 and 10%. But on a 5-gamer, you have to keep in mind that raw points matter. And so if you're going to get a lower owned Florida 1 instead of a higher owned Winnipeg 1, and you get more points out of them, and you find value you like to make up that delta for the 1.6K, I think it makes Florida 1 an interesting contrarian pivot pay up line. And lastly, before I let Mike weigh in on Florida 1 and Florida 2, let's just take a look at their correlation. You've got Florida 1 with Carter Verhaeghe, Kachuk, and Barkov. Again, pricey as hell, but good players. Though the thing that also sticks out here is Ekblad, 4K, D-man, first power play. That's a really nice price for a power play 1 D-man. So as much as I love Florida 1, what sticks out to me the most on Florida is actually Aaron Ekblad for 4K in the first power play. He'll probably be very chalky because of his price and because he's on the first power play. But I do think you could do worse than Florida 1 as a pay up pivot off of a higher owned Winnipeg 1, as long as you like the value and you can make up the relative value on a pay down line to stack alongside them. But Mike, and then the other thing I'll just point out is Florida 2, much cheaper, right? You can play Lundell, Listerinen, similar to Detroit 1 that we talked about before, Detroit 2 rather, with Kopp and Kane, kind of a similar price range where you've got the punt Listerinen, the cheap Lundell. Admittedly, not the firepower of these guys, but if you want exposure to Florida, you could play a Florida 2 with a Winnipeg 1 and kind of have your cake and eat it too. But I'll stop there and let Mike weigh in on some thoughts on Florida.
Yeah, the thing with Florida is Bennett's out, right? So he's usually on line 2.
We lose Mike?
I think Lundell's on
Can
line.
I just not hear you guys?
What's up?
Oh, you just can't hear us. Yeah, you just can't hear us. You go for it.
Yeah, so Florida, they didn't have Barkov last game. They have him this game. Now they lost Bennett, I believe. He was there last game. They just had a slugfest with Edmonton where I forget what the final score was, but I think there were over 10 goals. Usually Tkachuk is with Bennett on line 2. So now he's on line 1 with Barkov and Verhaeghe, kind of stacking that line a little more. But then you got Reinhart, which is, their best scorer, arguably, or at least their best shooter on line 2. So, he could score 2
guys, I cannot hear you.
2 power play goals.
Get out and get back in because I can't hear you guys.
Is it your headphones?
Go for it, bud.
Headphones you were bragging about earlier.
Yeah, super cool headphones. He was just buying them.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. I'll add my screen for now.
Yeah, go ahead.
I tend to agree with you. I think that line 2 is interesting. I also think that in the spirit of playing a stack on a team with a good team total, that I think could make sense. Power play 2, I think actually looks pretty decent because of the price. I mean, they're free, right? So I think that if people are going to be looking to play Florida and they do have a decent team total, I don't think that they should be a prioritization. But they have a decent team total. I think that if you're going to play them, you probably end up playing the power play 2. That way you can still have some Winnipeg 1. Because the distribution between the 2 different lines and 2 different power plays, it's going to be large, but the price difference, I think, mitigates that. And being able to have both Florida and Winnipeg in the same lineup, I think, is really, really helpful. So, Pablo, can you now hear us?
I can. I don't know how much. Could you guys hear everything I said about Florida or not?
Yeah, we heard everything.
Thank God. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I just went on this Florida explanation and then nothing came through. Okay.
Nope, you're fine.
Okay, so I caught the tail end of that, which is that, you kind of like Florida 2's price as a way of getting exposure to Florida while not having to not play Winnipeg 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mike, what do you think about Florida 1 versus Florida 2?
Yeah, I was just saying that Tkachuk's usually not up on line 1. And not to say, you got they're kind of loading line 1 for this game, but Reinhart might be their best shooter on line 2, right? Lundell and Luosterainen actually have good they played together a good amount. So I kind of like that. And what James was saying is power play 2, they're both on there and they're basically, free. And I don't know who else I would stack with Luosterainen and Lundell. I don't know if I would do anybody else on power play 2. I think you're kind of reaching if you go to Rodriguez or something or Schmidt. Yeah. But you really could. You could go Lundell, Luosterainen, Reinhart, Ekblad. You get a little bit of power play 1, a little bit of power play 2. You get some of them on a penalty kill 2, and I just think that's not a bad four-man stack. You could try it with line 1 too with Ekblad, but you're using all your salary, so you're sacrificing your second stack to do that.
Yeah, the thing about Ekblad is he's good relative value, but he is 4K because he hasn't really done shit this year. So I don't know. I want him, but it's not quite as incredibly amazing as you'd think. He hasn't been like the Ekblad people remember. Okay, let's move. Let's keep moving because it's locks in 38 minutes, and I think people want to build too. So Philadelphia is the next team total. Matchup wise, can you guys still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Philadelphia's been a hard team to play this year. They're just they mix and match. Their lines I think have been shifted almost every game. So anyway, just context. They've been a hard team to stack. They're kind of like a weird version of Carolina that's not as good as Carolina. For what it's worth, line 1 and line 2 look similar. Last 14. Line 2 has had more high danger chances. And then on the season or on a longer sample, line 1 is a little better, but pretty darn close. In terms of team matchup, not bad, decent HESF. And it may be a slog though, right? It's a slower paced game, not quite as slow as Utah, Vancouver, but not super fast. And then if we go to range of outcomes, Philadelphia 1 and Philadelphia 2 basically project equally in terms of median, which means that the cheaper team by $900 is going to be the one that projects better on a point per dollar basis. So you've got Tippett, Frost, and Michkov. And then you've got Coots, Konechny, Farabee for 900 more, projecting pretty darn similarly, although Philadelphia 2 projects a little bit better. If we look at correlation on Philadelphia, you can get line 1 with everybody except for Farabee, who's free at 3,700, not free, but cheap on Power Play 1. They do have Jamie Drysdale, former Anaheim guy who kind of blows, but he is only 3,100 on the first power play. And then you've got the second line with Tippett, Frost, and then you've got Michkov, who's, the savior for 5,100, but he's on the first power play. So not quite as correlated as some of the other teams, but you can play minis that are a little more correlated. It's not the end of the world, by the way, to play a line that has a couple guys that are not in the same power play. So I sometimes people get caught up on that, like, oh, I can't play Tippett, Frost, and Michkov because Michkov's on power play 1 and Tippett and Forster, or Tippett and Frost are on line 2 for power play. I mean, they might only get 2 power plays. So you're talking about, especially the second power play may only get 40 seconds of ice time for each power play. So we're talking about 80 seconds of correlation, right?
Yeah.
So let's not overreact to the power play. I do like to get power play correlation with my forward line, but I think it's just worth pointing out that I do think sometimes people overweigh that, especially for the second line, that for most teams only gets like the last 40 seconds or so of each power play. So any thoughts from you guys on Philadelphia 1 versus Philadelphia 2? I can't tell you I'm super excited in that game environment or in these players, but I guess if it's it's kind of like an off the radar, value, sort of value-ish. I just think we just talked about how much value there is on Florida 2, Detroit 2. Even you can go more balanced and play Dallas 1 or 2. I don't know that I want to go for almost the same price and play a Philadelphia team where I'm not quite as excited about the matchup.
Yeah. One thing that I'll say is I'll take it a step further of saying that you would prefer to have your forward line be combined on the power play, but it's kind of like pitch type data at that point. Maybe one of your hitters is better against a slider on a team, and so you try to include them, but they're probably only going to get actually 4 sliders to swing at in the entire game. And if they're batting 400 against those, one of those might be a hit. So I kind of look at it that way. I think that maximizing correlation to a team based on their team total and based on hoping that they break the slate is better than trying to maximize all the micro correlations. So I don't mind doing something like that and mixing power play lines. I don't even really mind all that much. If I really like a couple guys out of a forward line, I don't mind mixing one with another guy who is on the same power play, but is not on that line. If I'm going to do a 3-man for a secondary. But overall, I don't know why you would really get down to Philly unless you're going to MME. They're okay, but they're probably the 5th best stack, maybe 6th. And they don't necessarily represent that much value. They're fine, but I think I would still prefer Detroit 2. I'd probably still prefer Florida power play 2 over them for value. So I don't know. You can get there. They're okay. They project good. Florida FL2 is one of the better 2x percentages in the range of outcomes, but I don't know. It would be hard for me to get there for a full stack.
Yeah. Mike?
Yeah, I'll just say that, and now they're going to score 3 power play goals, but you don't play Philadelphia for their power play. They're just not a very good power play. But Michkov is talented, and he's cheap enough where you got to look at him. Even Bobby Brink maybe is I don't know. I'm at least playing Philadelphia as a one-off, maybe Drysdale. But Konechny, you could play him as well. But then Couturier and Farabee is now 3,700 when he was 3,000. It was a little easier to swallow. So I'm one-offing Philadelphia if I go there. But I'm with James. I'm not in love with playing them tonight.
Really quick, I'm going to have to hop off here in a minute. You guys feel free to keep going. I'm going to leave the stream up, but I have another meeting that I got to go hit. So just wanted to let you guys know.
Cool. Thanks, James.
Yep.
So just so folks know, I'm sort of building some hand builds as we're doing this a little bit because we got 30 minutes to lock and I don't want to
Oh,
Wait till the very end.
really quick.
Yeah.
If you wanted to share your screen still, Pablo, I think you're stuck on the range of outcomes right now. You haven't been sharing the screen that you've been looking at. So just wanted to do a little editor thing there for you. There you go.
Okay. So anyway, thank you. I will switch my sharing so that it shares like the entire tab and not just that one screen. Okay, so let's keep moving because I want to try to get through the last games in the next 5 minutes or so. So
yeah, I got about 5-6 minutes and then we'll jump. Yep.
Yeah, so we'll kind of do these fast, okay?
Yeah.
So Utah, Vancouver, Toronto, Dallas, Minnesota, Anaheim. We'll just let's look at these in totality. Do any of these stick out in terms of maybe sneaky lower team total games? Okay, so Utah has a decent HDSF, and then Minnesota has an okay one, and then Anaheim has like a sneaky good HDSF. And then of those games, the pace isn't great except for the Minnesota game, which we're not playing them against Florida, I don't think. So it's really like maybe Anaheim and then theoretically Utah or Vancouver, really Utah if you think that there's like a better value play in that game. So let's look at those teams. Let me switch the range of outcomes. Can you see the range of outcomes?
Yeah, I can see.
Great. So do any of them stick out? Vancouver one does, but I don't think I'm paying up all the way to 16.2K for them. So if we scroll down, Anaheim one is again 16K, a little pricey. So Vancouver two, looks decent at 13.9. Utah one at 14.6, and then Utah three has really good value according to sheets. Bug, Kraus, Michelli are 8,400 and look like they're like really, really high value play. Let's see if the DFO charts agree with that. If I go to them and I sort by value, the other way around. Utah, nah, they're not really up there. So that's kind of a sheets thing. They do agree that Utah one looks like decent, although they're not a value line. This likes Winnipeg three is a value line, or Winnipeg two for that matter. So, yeah, so I don't know that any of those really stick out a ton. If we go to team matchups, let me share this tab. I don't know why it's doing this now, but if we go to team totals and scroll down, you can see that in the last 14, Utah 1 and Utah 2 have been dominant. So there may be like some statistical reason as to why Utah 3 is jumping in the sheets because it doesn't look like it from a usage standpoint. And then on Vancouver, it does look like Vancouver 2 is getting a lot of the action at 13.9. So Vancouver 2 from a matchup usage standpoint is the team that sticks out down here. And then I'm not paying up for Toronto 1. Like I'm just not on this slate in that matchup. So I'm eliminating that. So I'm really looking here to see maybe Patches if he's still cheap or Nyes if he's still cheap, sticks out. We'll take a look at them in a second. Minnesota's not really in play based off the matchups we just looked at. And then Anaheim, I don't think I'd play them outside of like really large field. So let's go now to correlation. And let me share this tab instead. And let's look at Vancouver 2. So Vancouver 2, because they looked good on the matchups. And so DeBrusk, Peterson. So they're not that cheap, right? 5,200, 6,100. That's like pretty pricey for kind of like a low total away at Utah game. They'll be really low owned, but it's just worth pointing out that they're not very cheap. And then if we look at the across them, in terms of Utah, because sheets really like Utah 3. They are like, it is a punt line with 3 and 2.9 and then 2.5 for Michelli. So if you really, really need a punt, like a 3-man punt, you can go to them. But I don't know that I would trust that as like a terribly good play. And then in terms of Anaheim, you've got line 1. I don't know. It's a really contrarian play to play Anaheim. Jackson Lacombe is probably my favorite play there. He's 3,300 on the first power play. So I don't know that I like love anything out of Anaheim, aside from Jackson Lacombe, who's got a couple goals recently, and is their first power play guy at 3,300. Mike, any thoughts on these cheaper game totals?
Yeah, I mean, I want to like Utah. I think I do. I don't know. I have trouble playing a Rick Tocchet coach team on the road. He likes to really clamp down on defense on road games. But Utah too. Cooley and Gunther are just like really well correlated now that Cooley's on power play 1. McBain is basically free. He's a third plug you could put in, or you could play Sergachev and do a power play stack there. The shooters on the power play are Keller and Gunther. But then, I mean, line 1, Schmaltz could get hot at any moment, and Keller is still, probably their best scorer. But I really like Utah. I don't know if I'm going to go line 3 unless maybe Michelli one off or maybe a mini with Bukestad. It's interesting that they're sticking out in the sheets. I want to play Utah. I'm a fan of. They're kind of like my pseudo like Western Conference team now that they moved, and I don't know. It's tough because I want to play them. Something's telling me it's not a good play tonight, but I'll probably have some Utah too in a couple lineups. I like them.
Yeah. So anyway, I think the summary here from my standpoint, if we just do this by totals, is Winnipeg 1, Detroit with Kopp and Kane are cheap. If you can fit DeBrincat, great. Michkov or Philadelphia 2 is okay. Dallas 1, Dallas 2, okay, but like not that cheap. I think I'd play Dallas 2 over Dallas 1, but it's close. Florida, interesting. Ekblad is really cheap on the power play. Florida 1 is very pricey, but won't be as owned. You can play Florida 2 to get exposure to them with Lundell and Listerainen. Utah maybe with Cooley, like you mentioned. I don't know that I'd go all the way to line 3, but I think you can. Vancouver, like that Pedersen line is just a little pricey for my taste. We didn't look at Toronto. Before we close here, I'll just go to Toronto real quick to see, if how cheap like Pacioretty is, because I don't think I would pay up for anybody on that team tonight. So yeah, Pacioretty is 3.8. You can play him and Nyes or just Pacioretty by himself. You can play OEL for 3,200. So he can be active. He's coming off a really good game where he had an assist in 5 shots. So maybe he'll get hot. Patches has been up and down. He did like nuke like 4 or 5 games ago when I played him, and he scored 30. But he did have 4 shots. So I'm sure Sheets think he's really strong value. So you could do worse than like Patches with Pacioretty as a double. Patches with OEL as a double, as a mini. And aside from that, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I think it's like Winnipeg 1, and then if you want to get contrarian, play Florida at 1 instead, and then find your favorite value line in the form of Detroit or Florida 2. Maybe all the way down to Utah 3 if you need them, or Utah 2. And then if you want to get really contrarian, play Anaheim. Or just go balanced and play Dallas with like Philadelphia. And like nobody's going to do that. If you're playing large field, I think that's a very interesting approach. Not for small field. For small field, I would just play Winnipeg or just play Florida instead.
Yeah, it's an interesting slate because there's no like huge pay up spot, right? Even Winnipeg, like we say, they're probably the best stacked line. Well, Velarde makes it pretty cheap, So when we're talking about all these like deep values, I just don't think you're going to need to do that tonight if you're not going Toronto 1 or Florida 1. If you're going one of those, then yeah, you do need to dip down to $2,800 players or whatever. But yeah, it's an interesting slate where there's not tons of pay up spots. D-men, there's no Werenski or Yossi on the slate to pay up for them either. And then goalie is goalie, and it's kind of weird in that I would just correlate.
Mike, any last thoughts on defense, and then we can let people build for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Defense, there's not a lot of pay ups that I love. Morrissey's great. Heiskanen's great. Sergachev. I like all those. Riley, if you want to get a piece of Toronto and their power play, is not bad. And Ekblad. And Quinn Hughes too, obviously. If you're doing anything with Vancouver, you've got to consider Quinn Hughes as part of that. So that's kind of where I land. And I pay up for one and pay down for one is probably where I'll go tonight, or something like that.
Cool. All right. Well, I wish everyone the best of luck. I hope this was helpful, and we will be in the Discord later to talk about what we got right and what we got wrong, and hopefully everybody wins a bunch of money.
Cool. See ya.
All right. Talk to you guys. Peace.